I made two statements. I said in a number of states, election officials and judicial officials ignored or altered state election law in violation of Article 2 of the federal Constitution. That is irrefutably true. And then I also said we have now evidence that machines were flipping votes. And we got that evidence from Antrim County, Michigan, when a very clever lawyer up there, because every time somebody's brought a suit to try and get access to the machines to conduct a forensic audit, they have been blocked. The subpoenas have been ignored or squashed or what have you. So this clever lawyer up in Michigan noticed that way down on the ballot in a school board race, there was also a close election, so he filed an election contest. And before people realized what was going on, he got access to the machine and a forensic audit was conducted. And they determined that the Secretary of State's statement that vote flip that was acknowledged was just due to a human error. Well, the forensic audit proved that to be false. And it also it demonstrated to them how exactly and when exactly these changes were being made. So they were watching live when the Georgia runoff election happened on Tuesday. And they were able to see, because they knew what they were looking for then, see the same fraud occurring in real time. And that's what I said to the crowd on Wednesday. Now, it seems to me the broader problem is this. They're claiming that President Trump himself incited insurrection. Here's the exact quote of what Trump said in his speech. "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." In other words, he invited them to exercise their First Amendment rights, to let the Congress know their displeasure that electoral votes that were illegally cast were going to be counted to decide the election. Vice President Pence himself, scurrilously, put out a letter that morning saying that some had suggested he could unilaterally declare President Trump president. Well, some had suggested that. People are making all sorts of crazy requests. But the president asked for something very modest. He said, given what we know about the illegality of electoral votes in half a dozen states, would you just delay the counting so that the legislators that have asked you to delay the counting so that they can complete their investigations and determine whether those electoral votes were validly issued or not can continue to meet? And the reason they had to make that request is they were just coming back into session because the governors in each of those states refused to call them into special session the whole month of December when they were clamoring for that. And that's all they asked. And that's all the president asked Mike Pence to do. And yet Mike Pence took the most aggressive claim that anybody had suggested to the president and said that's what he had been asked to do. And that's not what the president's request was. But more troublingly, Dennis, the real essence of the claim of incitement that is being made against the president and against me is that we are identifying ways in which there was fraudulent ballots cast, allowed to be cast, and that we're not allowed to say because that gets people angry and therefore incite to riot. Those are the connection of the dots that are being made. And that what that means is that if somebody verifiably stole an election, it's not, the thing that undermines democracy is not the stealing of the election, but the shining light on the stealing of election. And therefore, nobody can talk about it. We would no longer be citizens, but subjects, or even worse, just sheep. And that's the fundamental issue here. Because they're saying the president has been engendering this, anger for a month by falsely claiming without evidence that the election was stolen. Well, there's a massive amount of evidence. There are thousands of pages of affidavits introduced in the courts. And so what do you hear? Well, every single court that's looked at it has rejected it. That, too, is a big lie because the courts have been rejecting this, have all been rejecting it on jurisdictional grounds without ever taking up the evidence and having an honest adversarial assessment of the massive amount of evidence that's been presented. This is the situation we find ourselves in. And quite frankly, as a citizen, we all need to make the decision. Are we going to just tolerate a government election? Let's assume we're right about this, and the election was stolen, and I believe I can prove it. Are we going to tolerate them telling us we're not allowed to say anything about it? Just sit down and go away. It's a done deal. And by the way, since we've done it so blatantly on this one, you can be darn sure we're going to do it on every future election as well. And we've already demonstrated you can't do anything about it. So just get out of the way and either be, silenced into submission, or we will destroy you. And those are the two options they are trying to give us. And it seems to me it is incumbent upon everyone other than just summer soldiers to stand up and fight what is a despotic move to take over our government.
Do you believe that this occurred in Georgia?
I do. We've got evidence that it occurred on the runoff, and we've got evidence that it occurred. Look, there was an election. The Georgia statutes for election contests, you got to do a recount and whatever. But then within 5 days after the certification was made, and the certification was made on November 30th, the second certification after the audit, within 5 days you have to bring an election contest. They brought that election contest on December 4th. And then on December 7th, Governor Kemp issued another certification of the election, which, by the way, had different numbers than the first two certifications. That election contest sat in the Superior Court of Fulton County without even a judge getting assigned for more than a month. And when they finally, and then we finally brought a federal court action. Say, you're violating your state law, and therefore, you've not let the whole election process set out by state law, which, by the way, is state law promulgated according to federal constitutional authority, because we're talking about the legislature setting the manner for choosing presidential electors. So it's a violation of the federal Constitution to ignore those state election laws. And when we finally brought a federal action on December 30th, the very next day they assigned a judge and scheduled a hearing for January 8th, 2 days after the electoral vote count. It's just laughable. And now they're counting those cases as just another couple of, the courts have, uniformly rejected your specious claims without ever once actually looking at the claims or confronting them or having an adversarial process to vet them.
So what was done, because this was the most important election of all, in my opinion, the Georgia runoff, because of the Senate being determined by it. What happened? Do you think that both races we have fraudulent numbers?
I do believe that, and the experts that I have been meeting with are the guys that did the Antrim County, Michigan audit, and they tell me that they saw it happening in real time and can prove it.
Will they have a forum to show this to the American people?
We're trying, Dennis. We're trying. I don't know where that forum's going to come. Somebody suggested the other day maybe President Trump ought to invite the impeachment and put the forum on there by way of defense in the impeachment charges.
Well, what will he have, 1 day or 2 days to defend himself?
Yeah. Who knows? And then, those things are always conducted by politicians in the House of Representatives who seem more bent on.
Well, I just want to make clear.
5 minutes.
No one is literally allowed, to say that this might have happened, but they could talk about the collusion for 3 years, which never happened. Now, I know you don't have more than a segment, right?
Right. Yeah, I've got to get back to it.
Okay, that's fine. Listen, we'll talk again, John Eastman. I want to talk about what his colleagues are trying to do to him. We'll be back.